The colossal black hull of the ship, a veritable mountain of steel, loomed over the bustling Southampton dock, its four massive funnels reaching towards a sky clouded with anticipation and coal smoke. It was April 10th, 1912, and the RMS Titanic, the largest, most luxurious ocean liner ever built, prepared for its maiden voyage across the vast Atlantic to New York. Crowds surged along the quayside, a kaleidoscope of emotions painted on their faces. The excited chatter of those embarking on a new adventure, the tearful farewells of loved ones left behind, and the awestruck gazes of onlookers marveling at the sheer scale of human ingenuity. Horse-drawn carriages and motor cars navigated the throng, delivering passengers and their mountains of luggage to the various gangways. Stewards in crisp white uniforms moved with practiced efficiency, guiding fur-clad ladies and gentlemen in top hats towards the first-class entrance, while a more boisterous, hopeful stream of humanity flowed towards the third-class gangway, their meager belongings clutched tightly, their eyes wide with dreams of a new life in America. The air thrummed with the sound of steam hissing from the ship's mighty engines, the distant blast of a horn, and the cacophony of 1,000 conversations, all underscored by the palpable sense of an impending grand departure, a journey into history. Among the privileged few ascending the first-class ramp was Rose DeWitt Bukater, a young woman of 17, her delicate beauty veiled by an expression of quiet resignation. Her gloved hand rested lightly on the arm of her fiancé, Caledon Hockley, a man whose wealth and societal standing were as imposing as his arrogant demeanor. Rose wore an elegant, wide-brimmed hat and a fashionable striped suit, the picture of upper-class refinement. Yet her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, hinted at a spirit constrained, a soul yearning for an escape she could not articulate. Her mother, Ruth DeWitt Bukater, a woman whose aristocratic features were hardened by a desperate need to maintain their social position, walked beside them, her sharp gaze missing nothing, her words a constant reminder of Rose's duties and the importance of her advantageous match to Cal. The opulence surrounding them, the gleaming brass and polished wood of the ship's entrance, seemed only to amplify Rose's sense of confinement, the gilded cage into which her life was being carefully, inexorably steered. She glanced at the cheering crowds below, a fleeting wistfulness in her eyes, before composing herself and stepping into the floating palace that was to be her world for the next 5 days, a world she already felt was suffocating her. Miles away from the refined elegance of the first-class embarkation, in a smoky, raucous pub near the docks, a very different scene unfolded. Jack Dawson, a young artist with a mop of sun-bleached hair and eyes that sparkled with an untamed vitality, slammed his worn playing cards onto a sticky table, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. Beside him, his Italian friend, Fabrizio De Rossi, let out a whoop of joy. They had won against all odds in a last-minute poker game, the prize a pair of third-class tickets for the Titanic. With less than 5 minutes before the ship's scheduled departure, they snatched their winnings and their meager knapsacks, bursting out of the pub and sprinting towards the distant, towering silhouette of the liner. Jack, dressed in worn but clean clothes that bespoke a life lived on the road, unburdened by possessions but rich in experiences, laughed breathlessly as they dodged through the crowds, his spirit soaring with the thrill of a new adventure, a new horizon. For him, Titanic was not a symbol of status or luxury, but a means of passage, another chapter in his nomadic existence, a chance to see America, to capture its life and light on his drawing pad. He carried all his worldly possessions in a simple rucksack, his most prized, being his portfolio of sketches, a testament to his talent and his keen observation of the world around him. As Jack and Fabrizio scrambled up the third-class gangway, moments before it was raised, they were met with a scene far removed from the hushed elegance of the upper decks. Here, families from Ireland, Scandinavia, and Eastern Europe, their faces etched with hope and apprehension, jostled for space, their diverse languages creating a vibrant babel. Children chased each other through the narrow corridors, while their parents found their modest cabins, starkly functional compared to the lavish suites above. Yet there was an undeniable energy, a sense of shared purpose and optimism that permeated the lower decks. Jack, ever observant, took it all in, his artist's eye noting the textures of worn fabrics, the expressions of anticipation, the raw humanity of his fellow travelers. He felt an immediate kinship with these people, dreamers and adventurers like himself, seeking something more beyond the horizon. He found his bunk in a small, crowded cabin shared with other men, stowing his bag with a sense of satisfaction. The ship's whistle blew, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the steel hull, signaling the commencement of the voyage. From a porthole, Jack watched the coastline of England recede, a thrill coursing through him as the mighty vessel began to cleave its way through the waters of the Solent. The RMS Titanic, a behemoth of human engineering, steamed out into the English Channel, its immense propellers churning the water into a foamy wake. On board, life settled into a rhythm dictated by the ship's routines and the vast expanse of the ocean. For the first-class passengers, this meant a world of unparalleled luxury. The grand staircase, crowned by a magnificent glass dome, swept down through several decks, its ornate woodwork and gilded cherub clock a testament to the shipbuilders' artistry. Lounges were adorned with plush velvet armchairs, intricate tapestries, and crackling fireplaces where passengers sipped tea and engaged in polite conversation. The a la carte restaurant and the dining saloon offered gourmet cuisine served by impeccably dressed waiters. There was a Parisian cafe, a veranda cafe, a gymnasium equipped with the latest exercise machines, a swimming bath, and Turkish baths. The air was perfumed with expensive cigars and French perfume. For Rose, however, this splendor felt like an elaborate prison. She moved through the opulent rooms, participated in the stilted conversations, and endured Cal's possessive attentions with a carefully constructed facade of compliance, while a storm of rebellion brewed silently within her. Each day, Rose found herself more acutely aware of the suffocating expectations that defined her existence. Luncheons were filled with discussions of business mergers and society gossip. Dinners were formal affairs, where every gesture and word was scrutinized. Cal paraded her like a prized possession, his hand frequently on her waist, his pronouncements on art and life delivered with an unshakable, ignorant confidence. He presented her with Le Cœur de la Mer, the heart of the ocean, a magnificent blue diamond necklace, a symbol not of love, but of ownership. Ruth, her mother, constantly reminded her of their precarious financial situation following her father's death, emphasizing that Rose's marriage to Cal was their only salvation. The vastness of the ocean surrounding the ship mirrored the emptiness Rose felt inside, a boundless expanse with no discernible escape. She would often stand alone on the promenade deck, gazing out at the endless gray water, feeling the wind whip at her hair, a solitary figure lost in a sea of forced gaiety and stifling convention. The future stretched before her, as predictable and constrained as the ship's predetermined course. A life of quiet desperation draped in silk and diamonds. Meanwhile, Jack Dawson explored the Titanic. With an insatiable curiosity, his sketchbook rarely leaving his hand, he ventured to the bow, feeling the spray of the Atlantic on his face, marveling at the dolphins that sometimes played in the ship's wake. He found a spot on the stern, watching the churning water and the receding horizon, a place where he could think and draw undisturbed. He sketched the stokers in the inferno of the boiler rooms, their faces grimed with coal dust, their bodies straining with effort. He captured the lively scenes in the third-class general room, the animated conversations, the impromptu musical performances, the children playing with uninhibited joy. He possessed an uncanny ability to see beyond the surface, to capture the essence of his subjects with a few deft strokes of his charcoal. His art was his voice, his way of connecting with the world, of making sense of its beauty and its pain. He felt a profound sense of freedom aboard the Titanic, a stark contrast to Rose's experience. The ship, for him, was a microcosm of life itself, with its rigid class distinctions, its myriad stories, its inherent fragility hidden beneath a veneer of invincibility. One evening, overwhelmed by a particularly oppressive dinner with Cal, his boorish companions, and her mother's incessant reminders of her duty, Rose fled. She ran through the labyrinthine corridors of the first class, her elaborate evening gown trailing behind her, tears blurring her vision. She found herself on the stern of the ship, the highest point accessible to passengers, the icy wind tearing at her hair and clothes. Below her, the propellers churned the black water into a phosphorescent chaos. The ship's lights cast long, dancing shadows, and the immensity of the dark ocean stretched out in all directions. Despair, cold and absolute, enveloped her. The thought of a lifetime with Cal, a lifetime of polite suffocation, became unbearable. She climbed over the cold, wet railing, her satin slippers precarious on the narrow ledge. She stood there, facing the abyss, her back to the ship, the wind threatening to snatch her away. The distant sounds of the orchestra and the ship's engines seemed to fade, replaced by the roar of the water far below. It was in this moment of ultimate desperation, teetering on the brink, that a voice cut through the wind, calm yet firm. "Don't do it." Jack, who had been stargazing nearby, his attention drawn by the sight of a figure perilously close to the edge, approached her cautiously. He saw the expensive gown, the diamonds glittering at her throat, but more than that, he saw the raw anguish in her posture. He spoke to her gently, not with judgment or alarm, but with an unexpected understanding, telling her about the coldness of the water, how it would feel like 1,000 knives. He distracted her with talk of his own experiences, of falling into icy water while ice fishing in Wisconsin. Rose, startled and disoriented, turned, her grip on the railing still tight. She saw a young man, his face earnest, his eyes kind. He was a stranger, from a world entirely different from her own, yet in his voice she heard a note of sincerity that was painfully absent from her life. As she tried to climb back over the railing, her heel slipped on the dew-slicked wood. She cried out, her fingers losing their grip. In an instant, Jack lunged forward, grabbing her arm, pulling her back to safety, his strength surprising. They tumbled onto the deck, Rose shaken and Jack holding her firmly, preventing her from falling again. Just as Rose caught her breath, her composure shattered. Stewards, alerted by her scream, rushed to the scene, followed closely by a furious Caledon Hockley. Cal, seeing Rose disheveled and in the arms of a third-class passenger, immediately assumed the worst. He shoved Jack away, his face contorted with suspicion and rage. Rose, desperate to protect Jack from Cal's wrath and to conceal the true reason for her presence at the stern, quickly fabricated a story. She claimed she had been leaning over to see the propellers and had slipped, and that Jack had bravely saved her from falling overboard. Cal, though skeptical, was more concerned with appearances and the potential scandal. He offered Jack a small sum of money, a dismissive reward, which Jack quietly declined. To further solidify the charade and to assert his ownership, Cal then grudgingly invited Jack to join them for dinner in first class the following evening, an invitation delivered with thinly veiled contempt. Jack, with a glance at Rose, accepted, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. As Cal led Rose away, scolding her for her recklessness, Rose looked back at Jack, a silent acknowledgment passing between them, a fragile connection forged in a moment of crisis. The next day, Rose found herself torn between apprehension and a strange sense of anticipation. The encounter with Jack had unsettled her, awakening a part of her she thought long dormant. She knew accepting Cal's invitation was a risk for Jack, placing him in a world where he would be judged and likely ridiculed. Later, seeking a moment of respite, Rose encountered Jack on the boat deck. He was sketching, and she found herself drawn to his work, to the life and emotion he captured in his drawings. They spoke more freely this time, about art, about dreams, about the feeling of being trapped. Jack's candor was refreshing, his perspective so different from the stilted pronouncements she was accustomed to. He saw her, truly saw her, not as an heiress or a fiancée, but as a person. Before they parted, Jack, with a charming audacity, slipped a note into her hand. "Make it count. Meet me at the clock." The grand staircase clock. It was a bold invitation, a challenge to step outside the confines of her prescribed life, if only for an evening. Meanwhile, Jack faced the daunting prospect of dinner in first class. He owned no suitable attire, only his well-worn traveling clothes. This predicament reached the ears of Margaret Molly Brown, a newly wealthy American woman whose unpretentious manners and boisterous personality often scandalized the more staid members of first class. Molly, who had a keen eye for genuine character and a disdain for snobbery, took an immediate liking to Jack when they encountered each other. Learning of his dilemma, she offered to help, lending him an evening suit belonging to her son. The suit was a little loose, but with Molly's adjustments and encouragement, Jack was transformed, at least outwardly, into a presentable gentleman. Molly also gave him a crash course in first-class etiquette, a bewildering array of forks and spoons, and advice on navigating the conversations of the elite. Jack, though amused by the charade, was grateful for her kindness, recognizing in her a kindred spirit, someone who, like him, did not quite fit the rigid molds of society. That evening, as the orchestra played softly, Jack, looking surprisingly dapper in the borrowed tuxedo, waited at the foot of the grand staircase beneath the magnificent clock. Rose descended the stairs, a vision in a shimmering beaded gown, her heart pounding with a mixture of trepidation and excitement. Cal and Ruth were with her, their expressions ranging from Cal's proprietary pride to Ruth's disapproving scrutiny of Jack. The dinner was an ordeal for Jack, a gauntlet of subtle condescension and overt snobbery from Cal and his associates. They quizzed him about his means, his prospects, his very right to be among them. Yet, Jack handled himself with an unexpected grace and wit. He spoke of his life as an artist, his travels, his belief in making each day count, a philosophy that resonated deeply with Rose and subtly challenged the materialistic values of those around the table. He captivated some of the guests, including Molly Brown, with his unpretentious charm and his genuine passion for life, while earning the increased ire of Cal, who saw him as an impudent upstart. During the dinner, amidst the polite conversation and the clinking of crystal, Rose found herself increasingly drawn to Jack's authenticity. He was a breath of fresh air in the stale atmosphere of her existence. He made her laugh, a genuine, uninhibited laugh that she rarely experienced. He saw the world with an artist's eye, finding beauty and interest in things her companions overlooked or dismissed. When Cal and his friends retired to the smoking room for brandy and cigars, a ritual from which women were excluded, Jack discreetly passed Rose another note. This time, it was an invitation to a real party, down in the third-class general room. Rose, feeling a surge of defiance against the constricting rules of her world and a powerful pull towards Jack's vibrant energy, made a bold decision. She excused herself, feigning a headache, and with a mischievous glance at Jack, agreed to meet him. This was her chance to experience something real, something beyond the gilded facade of her life. Slipping away from the oppressive opulence of first class, Rose followed Jack down to the lower decks, a journey that felt like descending into another world. The polished silence of the upper corridors gave way to the sounds of accordions, fiddles, and laughter. The third-class general room was packed with people, singing, dancing, and celebrating with an unbridled joy that was infectious. The air was thick with the smell of beer and sweat, a stark contrast to the delicate perfumes of the first-class lounges. But it was alive, vibrant, and real. Jack introduced Rose to his friends, and despite her elegant attire, she was welcomed with warmth and curiosity. He taught her to dance the wild, energetic reels and jigs, her laughter mingling with the music. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Rose felt truly alive, free from the judgment and expectations that normally surrounded her. She spun and stomped, her hair coming loose, her face flushed with exertion and happiness. In Jack's company, surrounded by the unpretentious gaiety of the third-class passengers, she tasted a freedom she had never known. The exhilaration of the third-class party lingered with Rose long after she returned to her sterile suite, but so did the inevitable confrontation. Cal, furious at her disappearance and her association with Jack, awaited her. He was not merely jealous, he was enraged by her defiance, by her public preference for a gutter rat over him. He overturned a table in his fury, his voice harsh as he reminded her of her obligations, of his power over her and her family. He grabbed her arm, his grip bruising, warning her never to see Jack again. The next morning, Ruth, equally distressed by Rose's behavior, delivered her own cold, pragmatic lecture, reminding Rose of their dire financial straits and the necessity of her marriage to Cal. She forbade Rose from associating with Jack, appealing to her sense of duty and familial loyalty. Rose felt the walls of her gilded cage closing in once more, the brief taste of freedom making her confinement all the more unbearable. The pressure from Cal and her mother was immense, forcing her into a painful internal conflict. Despite the warnings and the threats, Rose found herself unable to sever the connection she had forged with Jack. His presence in her life had illuminated the emptiness of her existence, with Cal and the suffocating expectations of her social class. She began to actively seek out Jack, finding stolen moments with him on the less frequented parts of the deck. They talked for hours, sharing their deepest thoughts, dreams, and fears. Jack spoke of his travels, of the beauty he found in the world, and of his passion for art. Rose, in turn, confided in him her frustrations, her longing for a life of meaning and purpose, her feeling of being trapped in a future she did not choose. Jack listened without judgment, offering not easy answers, but a genuine understanding that touched her deeply. He encouraged her to see her own strength, to believe in her ability to shape her own destiny. He showed her his drawings, and through his art, she saw the world with new eyes, appreciating the beauty in ordinary people and everyday moments. With each conversation, their bond deepened, evolving from a fragile friendship into a profound and passionate love. One afternoon, as the Titanic sliced through the calm, sun-dappled Atlantic, Jack led Rose to the very bow of the ship, a place normally off-limits to passengers. They climbed the railings, and Jack instructed her to close her eyes and hold out her arms. As she did, he gently took her hands, positioning her as if she were flying. "Open your eyes," he whispered. Rose gasped. The sensation was extraordinary. With the vast ocean stretching before her and the wind rushing past, she felt an incredible sense of liberation, as if she were soaring above the waves, unbound and free. "I'm flying, Jack," she cried, her voice filled with a joy so pure it brought tears to her eyes. In that moment, with Jack's arms around her, holding her steady, she felt completely safe, completely alive. The world, with its rigid rules and oppressive expectations, seemed to fall away. There was only the endless sky, the boundless ocean, and the man who had shown her how to fly. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, they shared their first kiss. A kiss that sealed their love and their defiance of the world that sought to keep them apart. The intensity of her feelings for Jack, and the glimpse of a different life he offered, emboldened Rose to make a defiant, deeply personal request. She went to Jack's humble cabin, a stark contrast to her own luxurious suite, and asked him to draw her, not as a society lady, draped in jewels and finery, but as she truly was, or as she wished to be seen. She presented him with the heart of the ocean, the magnificent diamond Cal had given her, and asked him to draw her. Wearing only that. It was a scandalous proposition, an act of ultimate rebellion against Cal and the societal norms that bound her. For Rose, it was more than just a portrait. It was a declaration of her independence, a way of reclaiming her own body and her own image. Jack, initially hesitant, understood the profound significance of her request. He saw the trust in her eyes, the vulnerability, and the fierce determination. He agreed, recognizing this as a pivotal moment in their relationship and in Rose's journey towards self-discovery. In the quiet intimacy of Rose's opulent suite, while Cal was otherwise occupied, Jack prepared his charcoals and paper. Rose, her heart pounding with a mixture of nervousness and exhilaration, disrobed, her movements graceful and deliberate. She lay on a chaise lounge, adorned only with the heavy, glittering heart of the ocean necklace. The room was filled with a charged silence, broken only by the soft scratching of Jack's charcoal on the paper. He worked with intense concentration, his gaze focused, capturing not just her physical likeness, but the essence of her spirit, her strength, her vulnerability, her burgeoning sensuality. For Rose, lying there, exposed and yet feeling strangely empowered, it was an act of profound trust. She was giving Jack a part of herself that no one else had ever seen. For Jack, it was an act of artistic creation imbued with love and respect. He saw her beauty, not just the superficial perfection admired by society, but the deeper, more complex beauty of a woman coming into her own. The drawing he created was a masterpiece of intimacy, a testament to their connection, capturing a fleeting moment of truth and passion before the world intruded. Their sanctuary was shattered by the unexpected return of Spicer Lovejoy, Cal's valet and enforcer. Lovejoy, suspicious of Rose's activities, had been watching her. He discovered the intimate scene, and a frantic chase ensued, Jack and Rose grabbing the drawing. And the necklace fled from the suite, with Lovejoy in hot pursuit. They scrambled through the ship's elegant corridors, then plunged into the utilitarian underbelly of the Titanic, into the fiery heart of the boiler rooms. The heat was intense, the air thick with coal dust and the roar of the furnaces. Stokers, their faces blackened, looked up in surprise as the elegantly dressed young woman and the third-class artist darted past. The chase was desperate, their flight fueled by adrenaline and the fear of Cal's retribution. They narrowly evaded Lovejoy, finding a temporary hiding place in the ship's cargo hold. There, amidst crates and luggage, they found an old Renault motorcar. Laughing breathlessly, they climbed inside, the windows fogging up as they shared a passionate, stolen moment, their love intensified by the danger and the thrill of their rebellion. Emerging from the cargo hold, they found themselves on the forward well deck, the night air cool on their flushed skin. The stars blazed in the moonless sky, and the ocean was a vast, dark expanse around them. They stood close together, savoring the quiet moment after their escape. The ship glided silently through the unusually calm, icy waters. It was here, under the canopy of a million stars, that Rose made her decision. She told Jack that when the Titanic docked in New York, she would leave with him, abandoning her life with Cal, her family, and her social position. It was a monumental choice, a leap into an unknown future, but with Jack, she felt she could face anything. He was her anchor, her inspiration, the man who had awakened her soul. As they embraced, sealing their promise with a tender kiss, they were unaware of the silent, colossal threat lurking in the darkness ahead, a threat that would irrevocably alter their destinies and the fate of everyone aboard the unsinkable ship. The lookouts in the crow's nest, their eyes straining in the darkness, suddenly spotted it, a colossal shape, whiter than the surrounding sea foam, directly in their path. Iceberg, right ahead. The warning bell clanged, shattering the night's tranquility. On the bridge, First Officer Murdoch reacted instantly, ordering the engines to be stopped and reversed, and the helm turned hard to starboard. The massive ship, however, carried too much momentum. It responded too slowly to the desperate maneuvers. A sickening, grinding shudder ran through the Titanic as the underwater spur of the iceberg scraped along its starboard side, below the waterline, for a horrifying 10 seconds. Many passengers already retired for the night or engaged in late evening socializing felt only a slight vibration, a subtle change in the ship's rhythm, and dismissed it. Some, closer to the point of impact, heard a more ominous sound, like tearing canvas or rolling thunder. On the forward deck, Jack and Rose felt the tremor and saw a shower of ice fall onto the deck. Puzzled but not yet alarmed, They watched as the iceberg, a ghostly mountain of white, drifted silently past into the darkness astern. They had no idea of the mortal wound inflicted upon their floating city, the fatal gash that breached 6 of its 16 watertight compartments. Captain Edward Smith, a veteran mariner on his final voyage before retirement, rushed to the bridge. He received the initial reports from his officers with a growing sense of unease. He summoned Thomas Andrews, the Titanic's chief designer, who was a passenger on board. Together, they descended into the lower decks to inspect the damage. What they found confirmed their worst fears. Seawater was pouring into the mail room, the forward cargo holds, and boiler room number 6. Andrews, after a rapid calculation of the flooding rate and the number of breached compartments, delivered the devastating prognosis to Captain Smith and Bruce Ismay, the chairman of the White Star Line, who was also on board. The Titanic, the unsinkable marvel of modern engineering, was doomed. She had at most an hour or two before she would founder. The captain, his face ashen, gave the order to uncover the lifeboats and to begin rousing the passengers, though the true gravity of the situation was initially withheld to prevent panic. As the crew began to move with a new urgent purpose, a sense of unease started to spread among the passengers. Jack and Rose, witnessing the activity on deck and overhearing fragments of conversations, realized that something was seriously wrong. They rushed back to Rose's suite to warn her mother and Cal. They found Cal in a state of controlled fury. He had discovered Jack's intimate drawing of Rose and the taunting note she had left with it. His jealousy and possessiveness, already inflamed, now turned to cold, calculated revenge. As Jack and Rose tried to explain the danger, urging them to prepare to abandon ship, Cal, with the help of Lovejoy, executed a cruel plan. He accused Jack of stealing the heart of the ocean, which Lovejoy found by planting it in Jack's coat pocket. Despite Rose's frantic protests and her insistence on Jack's innocence, the master-at-arms was summoned. Jack, bewildered and betrayed, was handcuffed and dragged away, to be locked in the master-at-arms office on a lower deck, a deck that was already beginning to take on water. Rose was devastated, her pleas for Jack's innocence falling on deaf ears. Cal, his face a mask of cold satisfaction, told her he had arranged for Jack to be dealt with discreetly, ensuring he would not trouble them again. He then tried to usher Rose and her mother towards the lifeboats, assuring Rose that he had also secured a place for himself on a boat, a lie intended to keep her compliant. Ruth, terrified by the unfolding situation, but still clinging to her social prejudices, urged Rose to forget the boy and save herself. But Rose, her love for Jack overriding all fear and societal pressure, refused to leave without him. She knew he was innocent, and she could not abandon him to die. As the first distress rockets exploded high above the ship, painting the dark sky with streaks of desperate light, a horrifyingly beautiful and chilling spectacle, Rose made a choice. She would find Jack, no matter the cost. The ship had begun to list noticeably to starboard, and the sounds of chaos were growing louder as more passengers realized the true extent of the peril. The order to lower the lifeboats was given, with the strict instruction, women and children first. However, a terrible miscalculation had been made in the design and provision of the lifeboats. There were only enough for approximately half the people on board. The initial loading was chaotic and inefficient. Many of the first boats were launched partially empty, as passengers, still believing the great ship to be unsinkable, were reluctant to exchange the perceived safety of the Titanic's deck for a small open boat in the vast, dark ocean. Officers struggled to maintain order, their shouts barely audible above the rising din of frightened voices and the eerie creaking of the ship's straining hull. Rose, desperate to find Jack, searched for someone who could help her. She encountered Thomas Andrews, the ship's designer, his face etched with grief and a profound sense of responsibility. He confirmed her worst fears. The ship was indeed sinking, and there were not enough lifeboats for everyone. He told her where Jack was likely being held, in the master-at-arms's office on E deck, and urged her to hurry as time was rapidly running out. Armed with this information, Rose embarked on a perilous journey into the bowels of the dying ship. The corridors she had once walked in elegance were now tilted at an alarming angle, making progress difficult. Water was beginning to seep in, cold and black, swirling around her ankles. The sounds were terrifying. The groaning of stressed metal, the shattering of glass, the distant screams of those trapped or injured. She fought against the flow of panicked passengers struggling to get to the upper decks, her determination to save Jack giving her an almost superhuman strength. She finally reached the master-at-arms office, only to find the door locked and the steward who held the key long gone. Jack was inside, handcuffed to a strong water pipe, the water in the room already rising ominously. He shouted encouragement to her, trying to keep her calm, while she frantically searched for a way to free him. The corridor was rapidly flooding, the icy water now up to her knees. Time was an enemy, the water rising with terrifying speed. Rose, remembering a display case of emergency axes on a higher deck, raced back through the treacherous, tilting corridors, her lungs burning, her soaked dress weighing her down. She found an axe, its red paint gleaming in the dim emergency lights, and, despite her fear and inexperience, managed to bring it back to Jack. The water in the office was now chest-high for Jack, and Rose herself was wading through waist-deep, frigid water in the corridor, with Jack guiding her, his voice steady despite their desperate situation. Rose swung the heavy axe, again and again, against the thick wooden door around the lock, then against the handcuffs. Chips of wood flew, the metal shrieked, but finally, with a last desperate blow, the chain of the handcuffs snapped. Jack was free. They embraced for a fleeting, desperate moment. Then, hand in hand, began the treacherous fight back towards the upper decks, the rising water chasing them relentlessly. Their ascent was a nightmare. Passageways were blocked by debris or by locked gates, gates designed to keep the different classes separate, now cruel barriers to survival. They encountered crowds of third-class passengers, men, women, and children trapped below. Their pleas for help ignored by crew members, who were either overwhelmed or strictly adhering to orders to prioritize first-class passengers. Jack, using his strength and agility, managed to help Rose and a few others climb over one such gate, but many were left behind, their faces etched with terror and despair. The ship's tilt was becoming more pronounced, the deck slanting steeply, making every step a struggle. The sounds of destruction were all around them, the roar of water, the crashing of furniture, the tearing of metal, and the unending symphony of human cries. They finally reached the boat deck, a scene of utter chaos. Lifeboats were being launched with increasing urgency, some dangerously overcrowded, while others still had empty seats that desperate men tried to claim, only to be pushed back by officers brandishing revolvers. Cal Hockley, ever resourceful in his self-preservation, found Rose amidst the turmoil. He had secured a place for himself in one of the last remaining lifeboats by bribing an officer. He tried to persuade Rose to join him, using a mixture of false endearments and threats, even lying that he had made an arrangement for Jack to get off safely as well. Rose, exhausted and torn, looked at Jack, her love for him warring with the primal instinct to survive. For a moment, seeing the desperation in Cal's eyes and the seeming hopelessness of their situation on the sinking ship, she allowed Cal to lead her towards a lifeboat. Jack, understanding her conflict, urged her to go, promising he would find another way. Reluctantly, her heart breaking, Rose stepped into the lifeboat. As it was being lowered, she looked up at Jack, standing on the deck of the doomed liner, his face pale but resolute. The distance between them grew, and the full realization of what she was doing, of leaving him behind, struck her with unbearable force. She could not do it. She could not leave him. With a sudden, impulsive cry, Rose scrambled out of the half-lowered lifeboat, heedless of the shouts of the crew and the other passengers, and, with incredible agility, leaped back onto the steeply slanting deck of the Titanic, landing near a shocked. "Jack, you jump, I jump, right?" she said, her voice trembling but firm, echoing the words Jack had spoken to her at the stern when he first saved her. It was a declaration of ultimate commitment, a choice to face whatever came next, together. Jack, stunned by her bravery and her love, rushed to her, and they embraced fiercely amidst the escalating chaos. Cal, watching from the lifeboat below, was incandescent with rage. His prized possession had defied him, choosing a penniless artist over him and his fortune. His carefully constructed world was crumbling, and his fury was boundless. He snatched a pistol from an officer in the lifeboat and, aiming at Jack and Rose, began firing wildly as they fled into the throng of panicked people on the deck. The bullets whizzed past them, one even grazing Jack's arm, but they managed to escape Cal's murderous rage, losing themselves in the desperate crowd. The ship's angle was now terrifyingly steep. The lights flickered and dimmed, and the sounds of the great vessel tearing itself apart grew louder. They found themselves near the grand staircase, now a scene of devastation. The magnificent dome had shattered, raining glass onto the deck. Water surged up the staircase, transforming its former elegance into a cascading waterfall of destruction. They climbed higher, seeking refuge on the stern, which was rising out of the water as the bow plunged deeper. They passed by the ship's brave musicians who, having assembled on deck, continued to play a calm hymn, "Nearer, My God, to Thee," a poignant and surreal soundtrack to the unfolding apocalypse. Their music offered a strange, momentary solace amidst the terror, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit even in the face of certain death. The Titanic's final moments were horrific. The bow, filled with water, sank deeper and deeper, pulling the stern high into the air until the ship was almost vertical against the star-strewn sky. From this incredible height, people and debris rained down into the icy water. Jack and Rose clung precariously to the stern railing, surrounded by hundreds of other souls, all facing the inevitable. The strain on the ship's hull became too great, with a series of deafening metallic groans and screeches. Like the death cries of a giant beast, the Titanic broke in two, the section between the third and fourth funnels rupturing. The forward section, now free, plunged beneath the waves, disappearing into the abyss. The stern, where Jack and Rose still clung, momentarily righted itself slightly before it too began its final, inexorable descent into the black, freezing water. They held each other tight, whispering words of love and encouragement, bracing themselves for the icy shock. The stern section slipped beneath the surface, creating a massive wave that pulled everyone and everything down with it. Jack and Rose were plunged into the brutally cold North Atlantic, a shock of the icy water stealing their breath. The darkness was absolute, punctuated by the screams of thousands of people thrashing in the water, fighting for survival. Jack, his arm around Rose, fought to keep them both afloat, searching desperately for anything that could offer them a chance. Debris from the ship was scattered everywhere: deck chairs, wooden planks, crates. He spotted a large piece of carved oak paneling, likely from one of the first-class rooms, floating nearby. With his last reserves of strength, he managed to push Rose onto it, but it was not buoyant enough to support them both. He tried to heave himself up, but the panel tilted precariously, threatening to submerge them both. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that he had to stay in the water if Rose was to have any chance. The water was lethally cold, around 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Hypothermia set in quickly. Jack, shivering violently, clung to the side of the wooden panel, his gaze fixed on Rose. She lay exhausted on the makeshift raft, her teeth chattering, her body numb. Around them, the cries of the dying slowly faded as the cold claimed its victims. The night was filled with an eerie silence, broken only by the lapping of water and the occasional desperate plea. Jack, his voice growing weaker, made Rose promise him that she would survive, that she wouldn't give up, no matter what happened, no matter how hopeless it seemed. He made her promise that she would go on to live a long, full life, that she would die an old lady, warm in her bed. Rose, tears streaming down her frozen face, promised him. "I'll never let go, Jack," she whispered, her fingers entwined with his. But his grip was weakening, his words slurring. He spoke of winning his ticket as the best thing that ever happened to him, because it brought him to her. His eyes, which had once sparkled with such life, began to dull. Slowly, inevitably, his body succumbed to the freezing cold. His hand slipped from hers. Rose, her heart shattered, lay on the panel, drifting. Among the dead, under a sky indifferent to the human tragedy below. She knew Jack was gone. The silence around her was profound, the silence of 1,000 lost souls. She felt an overwhelming urge to give up, to let the cold embrace her too, to join Jack in the peaceful oblivion. But his words, his final desperate plea for her to live, echoed in her mind. She had made him a promise. Hours passed. The first hint of dawn touched the eastern horizon, revealing a sea littered with bodies and wreckage. Then she heard it, a faint sound, a whistle. A lifeboat, Officer Lowe's lifeboat number 14, was returning, searching for survivors. But she was too weak to call out. Her voice was gone. She tried to shout, but only a hoarse whisper escaped her lips. The lifeboat was moving away. In a surge of desperate adrenaline, remembering Jack's will to live, she reached out and fumbled for the whistle from the frozen body of a nearby officer. With her last ounce of strength, she blew into it. Again and again, a shrill, piercing sound that cut through the dawn. The lifeboat turned. She was saved. Days later, wrapped in a thick blanket aboard the rescue ship Carpathia, Rose stood at the railing, watching as the Statue of Liberty emerged from the mist, a beacon of hope and a new beginning. She was one of the few hundred survivors of the Titanic disaster, a disaster that had claimed over 1,500 lives. The journey had been a somber one, filled with grief and the dazed shock of survival. As the Carpathia steamed into New York Harbor, officials began processing the survivors, asking for their names. Cal Hockley, who had also survived, searched for her among the passengers, his face a mixture of relief and possessiveness. But Rose hid from him, pulling her blanket tighter around her. When an immigration officer asked for her name, she paused for a moment. Then, with a quiet strength, she replied, "Rose, Rose Dawson." In that moment, she shed her old identity, the life that had been chosen for her, and claimed a new one, a tribute to the man who had saved her in more ways than one, the man who had taught her how to live and how to love. She saw Cal one last time on the deck of the Carpathia, his eyes scanning the crowd, but he did not see her. Rose Dawson had vanished into the teeming masses of America, free to make her own life, to fulfill the promise she had made to Jack. Many decades later, an elderly Rose, her face a roadmap of a life fully lived, her eyes still holding a spark of the vibrant young woman she once was, sat on the deck of the research vessel Keldysh, floating above the wreck of the Titanic. She had been brought there by Brock Lovett, a treasure hunter who had been searching for the heart of the ocean and who had inadvertently found Rose instead. She had shared her story with him and his crew, a story of love, loss, and survival that had remained untold for over 80 years. Her narrative had transformed their understanding of the Titanic, shifting their focus from a lost treasure to the human tragedy, to the individual lives that were irrevocably changed by that fateful night. Brock, profoundly moved, realized that the true treasure was not the diamond, but the memories and the enduring power of the human spirit. Rose had brought the past to life for them, and in doing so had found a measure of peace for herself. That night, under the same stars that had witnessed the Titanic's demise, Rose, frail but resolute, walked alone to the stern of the Keldysh. She climbed onto the railing, just as she had done on that other ship, so long ago. But this time, there was no despair, only a quiet acceptance. She opened her hand, and there, nestled in her palm, was the heart of the ocean. She had kept it all these years, a secret reminder of her past, of Jack, and of the choices she had made. With a small, knowing smile, she let the magnificent diamond slip from her fingers. It arced through the night air, catching the starlight for a fleeting moment before plunging into the dark, cold depths of the Atlantic, returning to the Titanic, to Jack, to the place where her heart truly lay. It was a final act of letting go, a release of the last physical tie to that life-altering tragedy, and a fulfillment of a silent promise to keep Jack's memory alive within her. Not as a sorrow, but as an inspiration. Rose returned to her cabin and lay down in her bed, surrounded by photographs. Pictures of a life filled with adventure and joy, a life she had lived to the fullest, just as Jack had wished for her. There were pictures of her riding a horse astride, like a man, on a beach. A picture of her as a pilot, standing proudly by a biplane. Pictures of her with her children and grandchildren, her face radiant with happiness. She had indeed lived a long and fruitful life, a life of her own making, a testament to the promise she had kept. As she closed her eyes, a peaceful expression on her face, she drifted into her final sleep. In her dream, or perhaps in an existence beyond, she walked once more through the brilliantly lit corridors of the RMS Titanic. The ship was whole again, vibrant and new. The doors to the first-class dining saloon opened, and she saw them all. The souls who had perished that night, now young and smiling, welcoming her. And there, at the top of the grand staircase, beneath the ornate clock where they had first agreed to meet for their clandestine adventure, stood Jack Dawson, his hand outstretched, his eyes filled with the same love and light she remembered so vividly. She walked towards him, young and beautiful again, and he took her hand. They kissed, a timeless embrace, as all around them, the lost souls of the Titanic applauded their eternal reunion.